you should be in control of the growth, not the growth in control of you. And that's you as a person and you as the business. My advice all the time is don't let it get to that stage when you have to actually start going through and really rebuilding your business so it can grow to the next level. Start it early, start it before you think you need it, because you will need it.
Welcome to the first episode of Made to Grow, the podcast for SME manufacturers, brought to you by Flowlens, the simple, affordable MRP system. Over the coming 10 episodes, we've got a host of experienced manufacturers, industry thought leaders, and subject matter experts sharing their personal stories and professional insights to help you on your manufacturing success story. We'll be looking at the highs and lows of leadership, the nitty-gritty of digital transformation, operational excellence, and establishing what is the right mindset for manufacturing success. So, stay tuned and subscribe on Spotify, Apple, or wherever you get your podcasts for a new episode every fortnight. This week, I'm talking with Mel Archbould, former MD of a successful materials handling manufacturer who now supports SME businesses in their scale-up journey through her consultancy, Cloudbusting. Mel shares actionable insights into the stages of development and the need to evolve as you scale. And we discuss the importance of vision setting and getting out of the weeds. So let's jump right in. Well, welcome Mel, and thank you very much for joining the podcast. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have to share with our listeners in terms of your interesting and varied experience with your manufacturing growth story and the work you're doing now with your clients through Cloudbusting. So welcome. And could you just give us a bit of a background to your story and what gets you out of bed in the morning?
Well, that's usually my daughter. Although having said that, she's very good at getting up herself and sorting out her own breakfast now. But no, apart from that, yeah, hi. Firstly, thanks for asking me to come onto your podcast. I think my journey in manufacturing all stems from my family, and particularly my dad. They formed a business back in 1985, and I joined that family business in 1990. And then for 17 years, I was the managing director of the business. The business was an engineering company. We designed and manufactured quite a niche range of materials handling solutions for a really wide sector of manufacturing industries, from pharmaceutical, food, chemical, logistics. So it's kind of been in my blood, really. Dad's always been an engineer, and I've grown up with it. Christmas presents were always something that he'd made.
Brilliant.
Market stalls, go-karts, etc. So yeah, definitely in my blood.
Happy days. And you obviously exited that business a few years ago and started Cloudbusting. So you felt you had a lot to give back. So can you tell us a wee bit more about that?
Absolutely. We actually we sold the business, successfully sold the business in at the beginning of last year. So it was the beginning of 2022. Took about a year to go through that process, and that was quite a big step, being the family business. But it was the right step and a good moment to do that. It's good for the business. I was then sort of tied in, as you are, with those types of deals, and then finally sort of being able to exit fully. I decided it was a bit like, well, what am I going to do? I definitely didn't want to do nothing, and still, need to work and want to work. And really, the thing that sort of I felt very passionately about and had done so much reflection was on my journey over those 17 years, taking the business through lots of highs, but a lot of lows and a lot of challenges, and really looked at what do I wish I had in place to support me as managing director, as a business owner, I'm a shareholder as well. And also on a family perspective, how to, sort of help family businesses as well through that. So I formed Cloud Busting. We predominantly work with SME business owners, so small, medium-sized business owners, and it's really helping them scale, navigate their scale-up journey. And particularly, my big passion is about sort of making sure they can do that whilst protecting their cash and their profit. And so it makes the journey worthwhile.
Absolutely. I think if you're not enjoying it as you go through each stage, what is the point?
Yeah,
Um,
very much so, definitely.
I think when we were chatting before, you had summarized the stages of growth, which was something that resonated with me, because sometimes it's not until you look in the rearview mirror that you realize what kind of stage you were at in a period of growth or period of development. And I think people don't necessarily know what they don't know, particularly whenever
Yeah.
they are in the weeds all the time. So it'd be interesting just to summarize that and illustrate that.
Yeah, well, definitely that. I mean, I think that in terms of my reflections on our journey, um, the what I really learned, again, sort of in hindsight, but it was the growth journey that we went through. Actually, so it wasn't so black and white as when you look in the textbooks and go, well, okay, what's an SME? So you've actually got micro businesses, 2 to 10 employees, small businesses, which are, I think, 11 to 49 employees, and then medium-sized businesses, which are 50 to 249. And business owners who are listening to this, or anybody actually working in a business, will know it's not so black and white as that. And you actually go through growth transitions throughout that journey, particularly as a small business. So from going from 10 to 49 people, you will have gone through probably 2 or 3 growth, what you call growth spurts. And they actually place real challenges on business, and you don't expect them to come, because you think what's worked for you so far should continue to work going forward. And the biggest a sort of eye opener for me was realizing how the different, once you need to bigger teams and actually your management structure changes, and as a business owner you're not so hands-on, actually that's when everything starts to change in your business. And the big one is to actually recognize that is going to come, and rather than sort of react to it, my advice now and how I work with my clients is about actually plan for it, expect it to happen, and be prepared for this.
Yeah, because I think you see, certainly in my experience, business owners that are trying to hold on too long to too much of what they were used to just having to firefight, or the detail that they enjoyed being involved in. And
Yeah,
some have to ask themselves the question: are they still the right person for that job as the
yeah,
business evolves?
yeah.
You know,
And that's really true, because quite often the business owner is the person who had the initial idea. It's like, could be the engineer, as in, is it the person who's going to design the product, or might be the person who usually they've got a very specialist sort of angle. If you're a great leader as well, then that's a double, that's a win-win. But there is a point when you do have to go, am I now the right person to take the company forward to the next level? And I certainly sort of faced that, because I knew where my I was good at what I did. We've done a lot of growth, very customer facing, but there were areas of the business which hadn't grown as quickly, in line with the sort of sales and products and everything. And that's really where, you have to look at, have you got the right people in the right seats for the different stages of the business? And also, and it's a tough one to face, but the people who got you from, from being a startup to where you are now, have they got the knowledge, the skill, the energy potentially to take you forward for the next phase? And so there's some big decisions you have to take. Again, if you're actually planning for that and having those conversations, then it's a lot easier to manage through those different growth transitions.
How often do you see business owners and leaders setting out that vision? That we may be a small, ish team right now, but 3, 5, 10 years time, this is where we're going to be. Is that something that you see a lot of, or?
Um, At startup phase, yes, you see it because everyone's, they do a business plan, they've got a goal, they know where they're going. Then the journey starts, and if they get through the startup phase, which is always the most vulnerable moment for a business, do they get through the first couple of years? Then they're into it. And what I'm finding is when I start talking with business owners who probably been running their business 10 years, 15 years, the plan, that original plan, that original goal is very distant, and they're not necessarily running around that vision. They kind of know, they might sort of think, well, yeah, I'd love to buy a boat, I'd love to have a villa in Mallorca. They have those kind of ideas, but actually they're so hands-on in the business. They've lost that actual tangible roadmap over how to get there. So that's really the I suppose the point when you have to ask yourself, what's happening? Why have I lost that sight? And typically it's because you're working in the business, troubleshooting, problem solving, growth starts to sort of slow down. You might find cash starts to get really tight. And all of these things are what happens because your business is growing. It's not a bad thing, but if you are reacting to it, then you're not necessarily making the best decisions. And you as a person are not necessarily working to your best self, because you're forever firefighting. And I know, I've been there. I know how you lose sleep. I know how you sort of just trying to get through the next week, let alone where's your 3-year vision gone. So yeah, it's quite common, to be honest, to see that in businesses that are around, I'd say between 20 to 35, 40 people, employees. It can typically happen at that time. And that's when I, sort of talk to the business owner and go, right, where do we want to go with this? Where what are we doing? What we're scaling up for? Are we going to sell up? Are we going to, have we got a succession plan in place? Are we going to buy businesses? Are we going to grow organically? Whatever it is, you need to know, because there is a definite best plan to follow in order to achieve your goals.
Mm-hmm. And I think that vision, if it's well enough defined, then the team can get behind it, whatever that may be, and that they know where they're going, particularly if you're asking them to make sacrifices. Like from our perspective, with digital transformation, companies are putting themselves through months of pain, of change, and the way things used to be maybe weren't tenable any longer, but at least they were comfortable. So, but knowing why you're doing something and why you're putting that, that extra effort in, or indeed, in some cases, sacrificing somebody. So if a project like digital transformation needs somebody who knows the business and has the authority and the experience to deliver it, but that is a sacrifice to something else. It might be growth, it might be engineering, production. If you're not going to make that
sorry,
investment,
that's exactly it. You have to, it's not necessarily a sacrifice, it's a reallocating what you're doing. And because, I think businesses starting out now, and with all the, fantastic digital products and the automation and the sort of tech that is around, to design your business at startup around these processes and systems, to me, is the way you start. I'm working with businesses that have grown not necessarily with those systems underpinning their business, and they're retrospectively putting them in place. I've been through it, going from 2D to 3D, for example, trying to, have a legacy of drawing data, and how do you get that into some kind of format that can then power your business? If you can start from that perspective, then that is absolutely the way to go. But I don't really see that it's a sacrifice. I think, for a start, I think people are quite a scarce resource now. And I was in 2 meetings yesterday where, all businesses, their biggest issue is finding the right people for their business, finding any people, but, finding the right people for their business.
Mm-hmm.
And so that drives you down, having to look at systems and automation, because, essentially, when you do get the right people, you want them to be on the value added tests where, if you can just automate those processes, get them done, don't worry. It's not about saving jobs. It's about actually, getting the system slick there, and then using the labor and the talents that you can get into your business to actually help grow and optimize what you've invested in.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I see it as living their best life. Nobody wants to spend lots of time, running manual processes, or, keeping a dozen of spreadsheets up to date. And, that's what kind of gets us out of bed, for sure.
Yeah, very much.
I know what you mean. It's not necessarily a sacrifice, in that, there's a bigger picture. I think what we see is, particularly on the smaller side, up to 20 people, a business like that can only do one big thing at a time. Whether it's an investment, or maybe a new product launch, or digital transformation, or enter a new territory, because any one of those things is enough to almost kill a business. So it's that sort of opportunity cost, I suppose, is the thing. And again, if you've got a clear vision, what makes sense to do in what order. And
I think it is that priority order. It is absolutely that. Growing your business requires investment. It requires cash. It requires investment. No two ways about it. Because you have to grow your business anyway, just in order to, at least maintain margin, cover your overheads. The overheads grow. So growth has to happen. But growth to actually take your business further forward, so this is at a higher rate, it needs investment, and you have to do it in a priority order. Otherwise, as you've gone and said, you can overstretch yourself, fall off the cliff. I unfortunately speak from experience where we did too much at times. We did too much. We launched too many products. We had too many R&D kind of really intensive focuses in the business, and it meant you just could not physically keep your eye on everything else, because we were managing this. It's too much, and things always happened. It was, I look back and just go, why didn't we just do this and get that one embedded, get that system in place? Then we go and take on 3 more countries to sell to, because we've built the foundations to be able to support that. So it is the building blocks of growth, and what, the layers to build, which are absolutely essential. Get them in the wrong order, and you really can go over the top. And after the startup phase, the most common time for a business to go under is during that sort of growth between 20 and 35, 40 people. So once you've got through that and you're into what they then class as medium, you get to sort of the 60, 70, 80, you start to have a more robust balance sheet. Things just start to support the business. So if you do overstep or overstretch, you actually have usually got more going on in your business to support you through that, or to support you through a hike in energy costs, or a pandemic. So it's about sort of understanding that balance sheet and the assets on it, and what to protect. As I say, protect your cash, protect your profits, in order to help drive your growth plan.
coming back to word you used a minute ago, there's the foundation. Mel, so if the vision sort of shows people how you're going to get there and get to that nice place where you have that cushion as well, your processes are the things that will get you there, and the processes are obviously living and breathing things. But and how important for you is process mapping in engagement with businesses?
I mean, wow, in terms of what I learned over, I honestly didn't know going into being the managing director of our business much about process mapping. For me, it was more like common sense thought. And I think I was quite fairly fortunate that my brain thinks along those lines, but I then learned about it and brought experts in to sort of help us address certain areas. And from that, really understood the value of mapping out your process. And again, now with the businesses, certainly with really small businesses, I kind of, Miss Bossy Boots, but I forced them to map out the process, because you can identify, what's going wrong. You're able to apply, sort of your non-conformance process. Once you've got that mapped out, to then implement your digital system, whether it's, a new accounting system, an inventory, manufacturing system, I'm predominantly in manufacturing, so that's what I know. Do it sooner rather than later. They are your foundation. So it's, again, don't start to grow, because once you've got that volume coming in and the customer demand and the deadlines, if your systems can't support that, your people will take the hit. They'll be working the extra hours. They'll be, and finally, they either throw in the towel, or they go, come on, this isn't good enough. And it's not a great place to work when, you're not able to support, because you want to meet customer expectation. You want to do that.
Yeah,
so get those systems in place as soon as you can, and understand, as your business grows, those systems have to evolve. What works for a 3 or 4 man business does not work at 15 people. And then once you're into, sort of high levels of turnover and revenues coming in, your system has got to have grown with you. So you've got to again think ahead. Is it scalable?
The Made to Grow podcast is brought to you by Flowlens, the simple, affordable MRP system specifically designed for SME device, equipment and machinery manufacturers. Our top-rated cloud-based software can help you cut down on wasted materials, time and money, and eliminate the chaos of running your manufacturing with spreadsheets and hope. Our customers have reported savings of over a day per week per person in their business by cutting out needless admin, duplication of work and countless mistakes. Plus, lead times are shortened by up to 75%. And after hundreds of successful implementations, we've got the blueprint for manufacturing success nailed down. Head over to flowlens.com for a quick video tour of the software and to hear from more manufacturers like you who have transformed their businesses with Flowlens. Now, back to the interview.
You told me a story when we spoke last week about one of your clients where you have their process map actually on the wall, and they're able to kind of interrogate it and evolve as things change.
I'm a huge fan of post-it notes. I know I don't know whether, well, obviously they're recyclable, but I use post-it notes. They're a brilliant way to start the process. I do it for brainstorming and everything, but for process mapping, they're brilliant. And actually that end to end, when you sort of start with what does the customer want from you, and you take it back, and then you sort of put this is what we do, and then you can look at the gaps, and it's a fantastic way to interact with and get people involved, and it's quite a team building process as well. So yeah, we do that, and whilst it seems very manual, and I know there's all these kind of digital whiteboards and post-it note processes, which I'm fairly sure will work brilliantly. It's just, you know, I'm a suppose slightly old school, but it's a great way to actually do that. And the business, you know, we were talking about previously, they're actually small scale manufacturers. Their products are in a very niche area and are on a plan, and we have a growth plan where they can scale and literally will be sold globally. And you know, the manufacturing process is quite straightforward. You know, we can automate that to a fairly large degree, but at the moment everything's hand done throughout the process. So we mapped it out, and then it became very easy to see, right, all of this could be done within a system. You know, at the moment we've got 5 manual interventions here, you know, so actually to scale, we could scale this, deal with more volume without necessarily needing, you know, a lot more people to do each of the sort of manual tasks. So it was a great way to actually get the team to see that, embrace it, and then wow, they're really running with this now.
Yeah, I think, you know, if team members, even if it is a small team of 4 or 5, they don't always know exactly what the other people are doing. They just know they want to deliver, as you said, for the customer. So whenever you get them all in a room and map that out, and even with bigger teams, you know, the penny drops as to what impacts behaviors are having on other processes, and ultimately how they put a drag on delivering for the customer or just make somebody's life miserable, and you know, internally or externally. So it is wonderful to have that. You know, I kind of call it the Bible that's on the, you know, and post-it notes are great as much as
it is. I mean, I think it is. It really is, and you know, I know sort of it's value stream mapping and looking at that, but it is it. Those methodologies are there for a reason. They really work, and it's just about how to get them into your culture of your company, of your business. And like I say, using something very simple as post-it notes actually turns something that, you know, you can read big manuals on, you know, and it sort of feels a bit daunting, but actually, you know, and like I say, I'm not nowhere near an expert on these methodologies, but actually, once you have grasped it, using that process gets you going. And then when it comes to then going, right, let's talk to some experts now who could potentially automate all of this for us, they've got it there. It's also very easy for other people to understand, you know, and see, and learn about the business.
Absolutely, exactly, because I think some of these things can be common sense, but to the outside observers, that things just happen. So they're a good way of training other team members or new team members as to why we do this, why does this add value in this sequence. And yeah, I'm a big fan of post-it notes as well. Moving them around and they're tactile. So in terms of your, you know, coming back to those stages of growth, have you got any other examples of Palomatic or your kind of current clients where you've been able to, particularly that sort of piece where people don't know what they don't know, that sort of intention where you can get make a difference with a client?
Well, yeah. How long have we got? I mean, certainly with our own examples, I think with the stages of growth, I think I talk to a lot of business owners who really get it. They really understand. Once you actually talk about it, you can sort of look at it and go, oh yeah, this is what's happening, you know, in my business. And a lot of it stems from when like I say, you get these sort of the hierarchies start to come, you know, because you need to. It's how you get tasks done. It's right. And getting you know, I think the big thing for me is what's driving what. And the rule should be, and I wish I was always told this, but you should be in control of the growth, not the growth in control of you. and that's you as a person and you as the business. When growth is in control of the business, actually those stages of growth they're all reactive. So you tend to make decisions around accommodating, could be the weakness of somebody because they don't know how to do that. Oh, well, let's do a workaround around that, rather than actually, yeah, but the business needs to know how to do that. We have to tackle it. And that's what I see in a lot of businesses that I'm talking to, where it's the growth has happened in a reactive way, or the structure they are, how they operate they've just ended up like that because the growth has controlled it. And then you talk to some businesses which have, sort of have that support and understanding and knowledge, or they've done it before and they understand it, where actually they plan the growth, and that's when it's getting the priority orders. So sort of examples for us, we did, so throughout the 1990s, the main focus was on sell. We set up distribution markets around the globe. We were, it was, I think we were doing probably 60% export of our product ranges. It was a fabulous time, really high level of growth. Behind the scenes, which is sort of, I did kind of touch on it earlier, the manufacturing and how we kept up with that were all quite manual processes. And this is in the 1990s, so it wasn't necessarily that we had, the access to, not even 3D. I think we just sort of started to look at 3D at the end of that decade. So everything was very manual, and what we found throughout the growth, it's quite obvious, but the margins start to erode because you end up throwing more at it to meet that demand, and then once you've got an overhead that's growing, then you need the demand to continue. You've got to carry on growing just to feed the overhead.
Snowballing. Yeah.
And we just went through these cycles of that, where we were very growth focused, we had fantastic products. We could solve a lot of customer problems, which is what we love to do. We were very good at that, but it was always catch up for the rest of the organization. And then when we got to the stage when, certainly for me, it was, after probably the third big hit on, as we were doing well, we then hit another big issue, a contract or whatever, late payments, so cash ends up being affected. It was that point when I just stepped back. It's like, why is this happening again? Why are we so vulnerable we still can't weather those storms? And it was actually really looking much deeper into, the processes, where the time was focused, and it really wasn't adding any value, but there was a lot of overhead on that. And so at that point, that's when we started to do a big, kind of sort of root and branch, go through every part of the business. But when you've got to 50, 60 people doing that, it takes time. And you've got an awful lot of data and history, legacy data, people who think they know it, they do it that way. We've always done it that way. You've got all of that. And to actually sort of have to go through that process at that stage of the business was really tough. It took a lot longer than I ever thought. And we were only, we were still coming through that at the point when we eventually sold. It was sort of to get, but we were determined to actually make it happen, because we knew what at that point, once all of that was embedded within the organization, then actually breaking through the glass ceiling and growing and really taking it up to, where the demand was around the world. Without a doubt, the demand was there. We had, it was never about making sales. It was about being able to meet that expectation, on time, right first time, all of that. So yeah, like I say, I could go into lots of individual sort of examples, but my advice all the time is don't let it get to that stage,
Yeah.
when you have to actually start going through and really rebuilding your business so it can grow to the next level. Start it early, start it before you think you need it, because you will need it.
If there's one thing you would leave the listener to think about today, just to bring it together, because it's, again, manufacturers tend to be trying to do a million things, but what's the one thing that can make an impact for a manufacturer today who's in that kind of growth journey?
I think, I suppose I do speak more to business owners and managing directors and people in those leadership positions. But without a doubt, know your numbers. You absolutely need to know your numbers. And by this, it is about how your company is performing, and the real sort of accuracy of that. So make sure, your systems, your reporting, everything needs to be timely. I can't stress some of the biggest challenges I had to deal with was because I didn't know my numbers, or the numbers I was given were not accurate. So I was making decisions on information that wasn't right, or they were too late. Hindsight is a wonderful thing, but not when you're running a business. And you need to know your numbers, you need to know where you're at. But also for the individual, for the business owner, is actually know your own numbers. And this is actually to do with your own health. And because such a lot is reliant on you, upon you, you are the leader, you're the figurehead, people are there to follow you. You've got to be on your A game just about 24/7. And you want people to be, you want to be able to attract the right people, but you've got to know your own numbers. So you've got to look after yourself. And that's, I took that as, well, it's like your blood pressure, your cholesterol, do you know your numbers? Do you know them? So I think, and I was told that to not just as business leaders, we were told, know your numbers, not for your business, but for you as well. Because if you do, you are always going to be one step ahead, because you can always do things about it. If the numbers aren't quite what you're wanting to see, that is why you're in that position. You're great at what you do, and inspiring, but you need to know your numbers, and then you can always continue.
Agreed. I know if I haven't run 3 times a week, I'm no good for anybody. So it's a very basic number that I
Yeah.
swear by.
Brilliant.
Yeah, fantastic. So Mel, I'm sure our listeners have been fascinated and inspired by what you've had to say today. How do they find you if they want to follow up?
Yeah, well, cloud busting, we have a website, so that should easily be found. www.cloud-busting.com. But also, I tend to be on LinkedIn. That's where certainly the people I follow and also, sort of take inspiration from are on LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn as Melanie Archbould, and cloud busting's on there as well. I've also got a business owner scorecard, which I use with my clients to measure, so they can kind of assess where they're at on the business owner sort of journey before and then during, when we've worked together, and then also afterwards. And obviously, again, know your numbers. We're looking for improvements in numbers. It's always about making sure we improve on them. So yeah, I have a business owner scorecard as well, which I can always share with people if they were interested, if they want to just get in touch.
Brilliant. Great. Well, Mel, thanks very much. I really appreciate you taking the time today, and good luck with your future endeavors, and the clients that you're working with are very lucky. So thanks again for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks a lot, Rich. It's been a really good opportunity. And I also think with what you're doing as well, I think there's a lot of good synergies there. It's great that we're all focused on supporting manufacturing. It's the backbone.
Thanks so much to Mel for being our first interview subject. Scaling isn't easy, and hopefully Mel's insights give you pause for thought about where you are in your journey. Hopefully everything worked like it should have and you could hear both sides of that fabulous conversation. It might come as no surprise to you that this is our first podcast, but like all things, practice makes perfect. And if you want to see if that saying holds water, join us back here in 2 weeks' time when I'll be talking to another highly experienced automotive industry and supply chain expert, Tom Hughes. A Northern Ireland native like myself, Tom is an internationally acclaimed champion in the 2-second lean methodology. If you'd like to know more about what lean is without drowning in jargon, Tom is a great person to learn from. So join us back here for episode 2 of Made to Grow, the manufacturing podcast brought to you by Flowlens.